Today, we're diving into three disturbing caving stories that went tragically wrong. The first one is particularly intense, a situation that pushes the human body to its absolute limits. The final story, on the other hand, explores something we've been asked many times. What would happen if an earthquake struck while someone was deep inside a cave? Our first tale is one of the most reckless and terrifying nights you can imagine. A night where one man ended up trapped, crushed, and fighting for his life. It was a chilly evening on December 21st, 1998 in Arizona. Brandon Silverhorn, along with his friends Christopher Reed, Gus Hansen, John Salazar, and Jeremy Platt, decided to head out to a remote spot known as the Safford Shafts, also called Red Ness. This wasn't your usual hangout spot. The area was littered with deep, narrow pits carved into the dried floor of what used to be a lake. One of these holes was covered by a thick stone layer, resting above several feet of loose silt. Not exactly the safest place for a late-night outing, but it was exactly the kind of adrenaline rush these young men were after. They arrived around 9 p.m., bringing gasoline and a handful of reckless plans. You'd expect anyone near sharp cliffs and sudden drops to be careful, but not these guys. Their attention quickly turned to a slim crack in the rock, barely large enough to stick a foot in. Their plan? Turn that fissure into a fire show. They poured nearly 10 gallons of gasoline into the narrow opening, gallons, and dropped in a flaming rag to set it off. At first, silence, then an eruption. The ground exploded. Flames and debris burst into the air like a volcanic blast. The once small crack widened dramatically in an instant, forming a gaping hole. Four of the men were thrown back by the shockwave, landing bruised and disoriented. But Brandon Silverhorn was right at the edge, and he didn't make it out. He had been leaning in when the blast hit. The ground beneath him shattered, and he lost his footing, plummeting into the newly widened pit. He dropped nearly 50 feet into a slanted crevice. His landing was horrific. His leg hit first. The bones snapped under the force. He continued to slide deeper, his body contorted in unnatural ways. Rocks and dirt followed, burying him where he lay. Then came the true nightmare. A massive rock slab, roughly 10 by 8 feet, broke loose and slammed down, sealing the pit and trapping him underneath like a tombstone. The others rushed to the edge, yelling for him, but visibility was terrible. Thick dust and smoke filled the air, hiding everything below. Brandon was pinned deep in a narrow space, twisted sideways, with his head jammed against the stone wall. His shattered leg throbbed in pain, while the pressure from the debris was crushing his abdomen and kidneys. Every breath hurt. Dust filled his mouth and lungs, choking him. He couldn't even scream. Above, his friends were panicking. They had no training, no idea how to help. Realizing they were helpless, they jumped into the car and raced back to town to call for rescue. Help arrived within the hour, but it was clear from the start this wouldn't be a simple operation. That giant rock wasn't just heavy. It was lodged deep in the crevice, almost as if it was part of the cave itself. Several hours had already passed, and time was running out fast. Brandon was still alive, but barely, and the rescuers were left wondering if he could even survive what lay ahead. A tripod was set up over the pit as they assessed the situation. The slab of rock that had trapped Brandon was massive, and the angle of the crevice only made things more complicated and dangerous. They knew time was not on their side. Between Brandon's injuries, the cold, and the crushing weight of debris, any delay could be fatal. Meanwhile, Brandon was enduring a living nightmare. Buried under layers of rock and dirt, his leg broken and twisted, his body unable to move, he was in agony. The pressure on his abdomen was unbearable. He could feel something seriously wrong inside. The cold seeped into his bones, steadily draining his body heat. Hours passed, each one testing his will to survive. The rescue team's first task was to remove the massive rock slab. They began chiseling at its edges, trying to loosen it. But every strike caused more debris to fall dangerously close to Brandon. Once they cleared enough space, they rigged a pulley system to the tripod above. Ropes were tied to the rock, anchored into the surrounding stone with hooks. It took the combined strength of 6 men, pulling with everything they had, to lift the slab an inch by inch. Finally, with one last coordinated pull, they shifted the rock out of the way. Now came the digging. The rescuers worked slowly and carefully, removing the surrounding dirt and rocks by hand. Every move had to be precise to avoid further injury or another collapse. Brandon's body was stiff and cold. Each movement caused a jolt of pain through his shattered leg. His throat was dry and caked with dust, making it impossible for him to even call out. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body battling both shock and hypothermia. But finally, after hours of exhausting work, they reached him. To everyone's shock, he was still breathing. By all logic, he should have been crushed, suffocated, or died from internal injuries. But somehow he held on. The final stage was to get him out. Rescuers carefully slipped a harness around his limp frame, stabilizing his leg to avoid further damage. Then, inch by inch, they lifted him to the surface. After nearly 12 excruciating hours, Brandon was finally pulled from the pit. What they saw shocked them. His leg was grotesquely swollen and twisted, his face pale, streaked with dirt, his body ice cold, and his breathing weak. He was immediately rushed to the hospital. Doctors confirmed he had a broken leg, severe hypothermia, and kidney failure. The fact that he was still alive was nothing short of a miracle. Looking back, it's hard to ignore just how reckless their actions were. Pouring gasoline into a crack in the earth and setting it alight isn't just dangerous, it's like something out of a bad cautionary tale. The consequences could have been fatal for everyone involved. But somehow Brandon survived, and the rest of the group walked away with injuries that could heal. Underwater, the silence was deafening. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath a second longer, his hand broke through the surface of a hidden air pocket. He shot up too fast. Crack. His skull collided with a stalactite. The pain was sharp, but relief eclipsed it. He could breathe. The air pocket was tiny. The ceiling hovered inches above him, like a coffin lid. He clung to a narrow rock shelf, lungs heaving, stale air flooding in. The silence in that pocket wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. Every second stretched like it might be his last. Meanwhile, Jerry had surfaced at the entrance. He waited. Minutes passed. Then more. Panic began to crawl in. He yelled into the water, voice muffled by the walls of the cave, flashing his dive light into the tunnel, searching, praying for movement. Back in the air pocket, David knew his time was running out. The air was going bad. He had to make a move. Slipping his mask back on, he took one final breath and submerged. This time he switched off his light, hoping, just hoping, to catch even the faintest flicker of Jerry's. Then he saw it, a dim glow in the distance. Barely there, but real. With lungs screaming, he pushed off the rock and swam. His body was close to giving out, his chest aching for oxygen. And then he broke through. Light blinded him. Jerry's dive torch. David had made it. Exhausted, trembling, gasping for air, he clung to the edge of the pool as Jerry hauled him up. They scrambled out of the water, up the shaft, each step heavier than the last. And when they finally emerged into the sunlight, it felt like waking from a nightmare. Later, veteran divers would tell them just how close they'd come. Air pockets like that, they don't always hold breathable air. And the silt they stirred up, it could have lingered for days, blinding them from escape. David and Jerry survived, but they never forgot the lesson. The earth doesn't care about your plans. If you're not prepared, it will swallow you whole. Geologists often say caves are the safest place to be during an earthquake. But one group learned that deep underground, safe is an illusion. It was Memorial Day weekend. A seasoned team from the Motherlode Grotto set out to explore Church Cave in Kings Canyon National Park. Dave Cowan, Paul Graves, Jack Acina, Bob Pine, Eric Popoff. These weren't amateurs, they were experienced, maybe even a little too confident. They began their hike early, climbing through rugged trails and thick pine forest, the kind of trek where every step matters. One misstep could twist an ankle or worse. But spirits were high. Jokes flew, laughter echoed. They were adventurers. They were ready. By the time they reached Church Cave, anticipation buzzed in the air. Descending into the dark, the world shifted. The cool air hit their skin, damp, heavy. The silence of the underground swallowed sound whole. Lights flickered over ancient stone, and shadows danced on the walls. They repelled into the first chamber, a tight, claustrophobic space, the kind of place that feels like the earth itself is holding you in its grip. And then it hit, a deep rumble, not a sound, a feeling. The cave groaned, the earth trembled, and suddenly the chamber roared to life. An earthquake. Dust exploded into the air, rocks dislodged. The ceiling groaned and shifted like it might come down at any moment. Hearts pounded, but the cave didn't collapse. Not yet. They knew they had to move. Fast. As they began their climb to the surface, a violent aftershock struck. The tunnel shook, and rocks from the canyon above began to rain down. Every vibration echoed through the stone, magnified, intensified. They pressed forward. Then came the worst part, a narrow chute ominously known as the torture chamber. Earlier they had climbed down it. Now they had to go up. Jackasina took the lead, but halfway up another tremor hit. The earth roared once more. Jack lost his grip, slammed into the rock and tumbled back down. He stopped, stuck, trapped between two massive boulders. He screamed for help, his voice bouncing through the chamber. While rocks and dust rained down, the rest of the team struggled to stay upright. As soon as the quake settled, they rushed to him. With ropes, coordination, and raw determination, they pulled Jack free, battered, bruised, but alive. There was no time to rest. Aftershock still rolled through the cave. The group froze with every tremor, clinging to the cold walls, praying they wouldn't collapse. Each movement forward was a risk, but eventually they saw it, light, the soft, blessed glow of daylight. They had made it. Just as they exited, one last quake struck. Rocks tumbled behind them as if the cave was giving one final warning. Don't come back. Church Cave didn't collapse that day, but it nearly did. And for those men, the scars weren't just physical. They carried the memory of that day with them forever, etched into their bones, a reminder that deep below the surface, the earth plays by its own rules.